Hello and welcome and happy UN Day to you all. My name is Stuart Wood and I am the chair of the United Nations Association UK. And my job is just to welcome you all and set up the rest of proceedings for this afternoon, this evening. I'm delighted that you're all able to join us, so thank you for coming. Briefly, I just want to say a bit about what UNA UK is and what UN Day is. UNA UK, United Nations Association UK, we are as old really as the United Nations. We are now also in our 76th year. We are the only charity in the UK dedicated to building support for the United Nations and international cooperation. We have over 30,000 members, we have over 100 community groups, and we work with over 1,000 partnership organisations around the world. What do? Well, we do 5 things. We champion the achievements of the United Nations. We try to influence the course of the UN and what it does. We try to press and work with the UK government in particular so that they lead on multilateral issues. We campaign for and argue for reform of the United Nations where it can be improved. And we focus our policy work on thinking about what the United Nations should do and what international cooperation can achieve in the future. So that's what we do. What is United Nations Day, UN Day? Well, it marks the official creation of the United Nations on October the 24th, 1945. And it's a chance for us at UNA UK to bring together friends, policymakers, diplomats, NGOs, business people and supporters more broadly to remember past achievements, but also to discuss future achievements. And today's event is going to focus on the defining challenge of not just my generation, but the generations of all of you involved in this event, climate change, focusing on the steps we need to take together across nations, across generations in the run up to COP26 later this month and beyond. And in connection with that, we're about to see a short video from the UN about the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the report that's just come out, which Secretary General of the United Nations has dubbed with the arresting phrase "Code Red for Humanity," from which we've borrowed for the title of this event today. So thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy this very short video, and afterwards the event will be led for the next section by our Executive Director, Natalie Samarasinha, who's going to talk about the awards that we are pleased to be issuing later today. So thank you and enjoy the video.
With further warming in the coming years, we expect to see new extremes that are unprecedented in magnitude, frequency, timing, or in regions that have never encountered those types of extremes.
You've been telling us for over 3 decades of the dangers of allowing the planet to warm. The world listened, but didn't hear.
It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and the land. We confirm that human-caused emissions of greenhouse gases are the main driver of global warming.
Climate change is here now, but we are also here now. And if we don't act, who will?
Hello, and welcome to this event. I'm Natalie Samarasinha. I'm the CEO of UNA UK. And I wanted to say a little bit more about the report that we saw just mentioned now in the film before going on to introduce our speakers. So the report we just heard about is the first major review of scientific evidence since 2013. And even though it's written, as is typical for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in very cautious, and I have to say I personally find difficult language, it's pretty clear and pretty alarming. It says that temperatures have already increased by more than 1 degree Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. They have even breached the 1.5 degrees, which is the aspirational target set out in the Paris Agreement at certain points over the last few years. And as we heard in the film, this has altered our world in ways that cannot be reversed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Whatever we do now, the ocean will continue to warm and glaciers will continue to melt. But what our action can do is have a huge impact on how many people will suffer as a result of these changes and how many people will die as a result of extreme weather, climate-fueled conflict, disease, food disruption, and more. As usual, it is the poorest countries and the poorest people within all countries who will suffer the most. But none of us is safe. We only have to look at the chaos we have experienced and continue to experience as the result of a single virus. Think of what happens even in rich countries every time there is a shortage of a certain item or service. These minor disruptions pale in comparison with what we in the West seem very happy to accept as a daily reality for people in many developing countries. But still we react with panic and alarm. So we need to get our act together. I think that's the key message of the film we just saw. That's certainly the message that the UN is bringing to the Glasgow conference that will be happening in just a few days' time. The conference will discuss the Paris Climate Agreement adopted in 2015. Now, that agreement was a compromise, like all international agreements. It reflected what was possible, given the reluctance of big carbon emitters, both from the developed and developing world, to take on binding commitments and the justified concerns of developing countries and communities, small islands, indigenous and coastal communities who basically fear for their survival and existence, and poorer nations who are worried that curbs on emissions will impede their ability to make progress without adequate support. But although UNA, I think like many other NGOs, called initially for a binding treaty, we recognized that really, given the state of affairs, we needed to have a deal. And we have therefore focused, since Paris was adopted, on really calling for it to be seen as a base for greater ambition in terms of nationally determined contributions, for greater scrutiny of these contributions and their implementation, and for mechanisms and processes to ensure that the sum of all these pledges made by countries adds up to putting us onto the path to the future that we need. At present, they do not. Even if all targets are met, we are still likely to see an increase in temperatures of 2.7 degrees. Glasgow has to change that. We need to reach zero before 2050, and we need to do it in a way that ensures that we do not make things even worse for the most vulnerable and for the poorest. We need a just transition that is not an optional add-on. That has to be the essence of what we try to do. We cannot continue to compartmentalize climate, environment, human rights, and security and development concerns. So we at UNA UK, we will try to play our part. Our movement would like to be, I think, at the forefront of helping people from different communities, marginalized voices from the global south and from our own country to be heard in the international stage. We have a report coming out shortly on inclusion at COP and other UN climate and environment conferences. We have been using our platforms, our events, including this one, to give voice to different actors from different parts of the world. We also push and campaign in general for the UN to be more open, more transparent, more inclusive, more accountable to the people it serves. And today's meeting is very much part of those efforts. So each year we use our UN Day commemoration to raise awareness of the UN's essential work, but also to honor individuals who have served its principles with distinction. The award is named for Sir Brian Urquhart, who was basically a legendary British UN civil servant who shaped the UN in profound ways and really showed the importance of good leadership and creativity. He managed to change the UN without getting mired in sort of complex UN reform processes. And I'm really, really pleased that this year, for the very first time, we will be awarding 2 individuals. One is a woman who has served at the highest level of the United Nations as President of the General Assembly. I will introduce her in a minute. And the other is a climate activist who has worked with the Secretary General as chair of his youth advisory group on climate change. She will be introduced later by a colleague, but I will mention now that she is the first ever youth recipient of our UN Day Award, because we want to make clear that you don't need to have some high-flying job or string of accolades to your name to make an impact. You just need to be doing the work as she has been so brilliantly. And with this joint award, we also really, really, really want to stress the importance of intergenerational action. We want to stress the importance of work across regions and sectors. And we also want to stress the importance of solidarity between women who are on the front lines of climate action around the world. Our keynote speaker and first award winner exemplifies these values. Indeed, she taught me so much in the brief months where I had the privilege and pleasure of working for her when she was President of the General Assembly. Maria Fernanda Espinosa has over 20 years of experience in international negotiations and multilateralism, working across peace and security, defense, disarmament, human rights, gender, sustainable development, environment, biodiversity, and climate change. She served Ecuador as Minister for Foreign Affairs twice and as Minister of Defense. And I'm sure everyone can recognize that those are roles, where the glass ceiling for women is even harder to break. She also served as Minister for Natural and Cultural Heritage. She was a chief negotiator at both the 16th and 17th UN climate conferences, as well as at the Rio+20 conference on sustainable development. In 2008, she became the first woman to become Ecuador's ambassador to the UN in New York. She chaired the work of the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, including at the Paris Climate Conference. Before her diplomatic career, she worked on environmental, indigenous issues in academia and civil society, including at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. She's just a brilliant woman. And after her keynote speech, we're going to bring in our other award winner and then have a joint Q&A, because I'm sure everyone will have lots and lots of questions. And for the audience, please go ahead already while you hear Maria speak and use the Q&A function to plug in your questions so we can be ready to go when Q&A comes. Maria, welcome. We're so delighted to have you. Your leadership has been really inspiring to me personally. I think it was a career highlight for me to have supported you in your quest to make the UN relevant to all. When people ask me, what difference does feminist leadership really make? I always point them to you. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Natalie, for this. Thank you to Lord Stuart Wood and the entire team of the United Nations Association in the UK. You are responsible for bringing us together to commemorate the 76th anniversary of the United Nations. So thank you very much. And I'm especially thrilled to be here today. And I have to say, I'm deeply moved to be presented with the Brian Urquhart Award. And I thank you for this high honor. And I think that I'm so happy that I have also the privilege to share this acknowledgement with a great climate hero, a powerful young woman, Nisreen El Saim. And I think that this acknowledgement gives me more energy and drive to follow the example of the greatest multilateralist of all, Sir Brian Urquhart. And I had the pleasure to meet him and witness firsthand his brilliant and generous mind. And it was his 100th birthday when I met him, and he was a true troubleshooter for the UN, as he was called. So I'm again deeply moved and honored for this award. And I have to say that the dialogue today, the title of the dialogue, captures very, very well our troubled world of today. A red code for humanity. This is, I believe, a time like no other, an adverse social, economic, and humanitarian context marked by the impact of simultaneous and interconnected global crisis, as you pictured very well, dear Natalie. And these global crises span from the worst global health emergency in a century, an extinction crisis, to the increase in frequency and intensity of extreme weather events due to the climate crisis. We saw this, heartbreaking images in the brief documentary that you showed from the UN. But in spite of that, it is now also a time of creativity, of reinvention, of vibrant and powerful movements and voices around the globe, asking for a more humane, generous, responsible, and sensible world. In the climate field, in the food security field, in the development field. So I think that we live this moment of paradox, a deep and profound crisis, but at the same time, a very strong and vibrant society, coming together to change and to improve our world. So, but let's take the climate crisis as perhaps I always say that the climate crisis is not the problem, but rather a symptom of our dysfunctional societies. We have the knowledge, we have the technology, the resources, and yet the pace and the intensity of our efforts to curb climate change are largely insufficient. And we know that this is the case. Just if we look at a recent study from UNEP, a report on the COVID-19 related fiscal rescue and recovery efforts that have been implemented by the 50 leading economies. This study reveals that the world is falling short to build back more sustainably. It's as if we did not learn, from the tragedy. So this report documents that only 18% of the global recovery spending in 2020 was invested in low carbon energy, green transport, energy efficiency, ecosystem regeneration initiatives, reforestation, and green research and development. So these are not good news. As we saw previously, the changes in global temperatures are already affecting every inhabited region across the globe. So it's not only, of course, the global south suffers more because it has less resources, less available technology, but the IPCC asserts very clearly that many of the changes due to the past and future greenhouse gas emissions are irreversible. So this is really worrisome. So similar to other crises, climate change is exacerbating pre-existing inequalities and jeopardizing the full enjoyment of human rights and of the most vulnerable, and creating new barriers to overcoming poverty and conflict. So according to some estimates, disasters resulting from extreme weather events are causing 60,000 deaths and pushing 26 million people into poverty every year. With these trends, by 2050, climate change will cause more than 140 million forced displaced people. So while the climate crisis peaks the COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc, the global health crisis, and it has already affected more than 240 million people, close to 5 million deaths, and the worst economic crisis that we have witnessed in our lifetime. So it, the COVID crisis has also caused the first increase in global poverty in more than 20 years by pushing 97 million additional people into poverty in 2020. So unfortunately, the end of the pandemic is far from being over. We know that industrialized countries have vaccinated around 60% of their population, and in the global south, the percentage is at 3%. So we see an incredible and acceptable inequality in the access to the COVID-19 vaccines. And basically, this trend, we know, will increase the disparities within and among countries and cause more polarization, more anxiety, more insecurity, and greater mistrust in our political institutions. So the situation is not very promising. And we often forget that COVID is a zoonotic disease. It originates in animals. This is the way in which I always, use this metaphor, but it is the way in which nature complains to us, speaks to us. It is a stark reminder to humans that we have trespassed the boundaries. We have invaded other habitats, and we have affected the livelihoods of other species. So these crises are both, I think, the cause and the symptom of a dysfunctional global system whose institutional and ideational structures are no longer capable of ensuring healthy and sustainable relationships between society, the economy, and nature. So this situation comes as no surprise, considering that our multilateral system, which has its center of gravity in the United Nations, was conceived to address the challenges of a geopolitical context that has dramatically changed. But this does not mean that the United Nations are obsolete, let alone irrelevant. Quite the contrary, I would say. The levels of socioeconomic development, the progress in human rights, the relative international peace and stability that the world enjoys today could not have been possible without the existence of our United Nations. Well, but in spite of that, global challenges have mutated as a result of the increased levels of planetary interconnection and interdependence and of globalization, thus becoming I would say, becoming transnational in their dynamics and global in their impacts. So consequently, the challenges of the new century can not longer be dealt by countries alone, regardless of their size, of their military or economic power. We need concerted, collective, global responses and action to deliver the global public goods that people need and deserve. And for that to happen, I think the United Nations needs to be rejuvenated and reformed. This cry for a profound retooling of the UN was crystal clear during the global dialogue that took place for the 75th anniversary of the organization. And Nathalie Samaras-Singh was so instrumental to that process, in a process that materialized in the UN75 political declaration that was adopted unanimously by the 193 member states of the UN. So, and this declaration gave birth to the very recent Secretary General's report called Our Common Agenda. And allow me to stop for a moment here to say a few words about our common agenda. If we look at the process, I think that this report is the result of an inclusive and extensive consultation that was truthfully followed up on the global consultations of the UN75 political declaration. And of course, it's not a perfect document, but I think it provides a clear blueprint on how to strengthen the United Nations under the principles of solidarity, of inclusion, of intergenerational justice, and proposes a wide range of recommendations. And let me perhaps summarize a few of them so we get a flavor for those who haven't had the chance to read the report. But basically, it aims at implementing, at closing the implementation gap of the already existing international agreements and commitments, starting by the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement. And that, of course, requires a renewed social contract between government, citizens, in order to rebuild trust and social cohesion and embrace a comprehensive vision of human rights. The report also promotes a stronger commitment to protect our global commons, be it climate, biodiversity, health, as a precondition for sustainable development. It also speaks about democratizing global governance through the meaningful participation of civil society, of women, of young people in decision-making. And democratizing decision-making comes along with, of course, the fight against misinformation, to end infodemics, and foster empirically backed consensus and a better loop between science, knowledge, and decision-making. The report also, and I really like this approach to putting women front and center, women and girls, and achieve gender equality through the full realization of equal rights, of the participation of women in all spheres of public life, in decision-making, and the economic inclusion and empowerment of women, and of course, the eradication of gender-based violence. And these are among the objectives, the big framework of the report. It, of course, calls for a more networked and inclusive multilateral system. And that requires a profound reform and retooling of the system. And there are, as mentioned, a big and ample list of suggested reforms and recommendations. There are about 90 proposals containing the 80 pages of the report. And there are interesting ideas and commitments, such as the new special envoy for future generations, teamed up with a Futures Lab for anticipatory decision making, the need to really upgrade the office of the UN Youth Envoy, a high-level advisory board to identify global public goods and other areas where international governance improvements are needed, a new agenda for peace, putting special emphasis on prevention and on the role of women in peace and security, et cetera, et cetera. And basically, I think that I think it's very promising that one of the ideas is a repurposed trustship council that will work as a multi-stakeholder body to tackle emerging challenges, to serve as a sort of a deliberative forum to act on behalf of the next generation. So I think that it also calls for a quick and swift response to the COVID pandemic, ensuring that at least the world vaccinates 70% of its population by next year. It also has strong call for speeding up and scaling up the action on climate mitigation, adaptation, and climate funding, especially for developing countries. And of course, I think that in all this could end up in a platform, in two summits that I think are, I would say, an opportunity or the means to establish a true global dialogue. Sometimes, basically, you know, and I would warn that that the need to revert this summit fatigue, this summit public disenchantment, and the only way to counter this trend is by making sure that there is social ownership on the process and the outcomes of these two summits, the Summit of the Future in 2023 and a social summit in 2025. So, of course, Our Common Agenda document is not perfect. I would personally would have liked to see indigenous and local communities, persons with disabilities, the private sector better profiled in the report. It is certain that we need to ensure that diverse voices of civil society and the most marginalized are fully included in the preparatory process towards the 2023 and 2025 summits. So the weaving of a new social contract cannot be done without the participation of the most vulnerable, and yet, you know, powerful, wise, resilient, and creative peoples and communities. I think this is a hugely ambitious agenda that requires a well thought through choreography and in-depth analysis, a multi-pronged approach, and a strategic engagement of civil society and other key stakeholders. So we have with this agenda a window of opportunity that cannot go to waste. So I would like to use perhaps my few minutes, the few minutes that I have left, to briefly reflect on what I have learned in these more than 25 years of dozens of biodiversity, climate, wetlands, chemicals, COPs, international summits, meetings, negotiations, documents, you know, so many nights without sleep as an activist, as a civil society advocate, as a lead negotiator, as a minister, as an ambassador. And I have to say, you know, truth be told, in spite of the slow, frustrating processes, the small progress, sometimes setbacks, but also major breakthroughs, even sometimes exhilarating experiences, such as I recall vividly the moment when the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted after 20 years of negotiations, or the late night in cold Paris when we heard the gavel for the adoption of the Paris Agreement. I have to say that in spite of all of that, I am a true believer in multilateralism, in the power, sometimes untapped or underutilized, of the United Nations. In these 76 years, I think that the UN has certainly made the world a better place. And of course, I could go on and on and on to talking about what has not worked and citing shocking data to prove my point. And yes, we should connect the dots between, Natalie was saying that we need to connect the dots between the climate, biodiversity, inequalities, conflicts, and human rights crisis, and realize that we are truly experiencing a civilizational, systemic cataclysm that require much more than a Band-Aid approach for a profound wound that we have inflicted to Mother Earth, to other humans, because they have different beliefs, different cultures, different ethnicities, different ages, different genders. But we cannot say that this is a manifest destiny and remain in paralysis. I would strongly argue that human-made crises should have human-made solutions. But for that, we need much more, you know, for a true new social contract. And let me just share to close some unstructured ideas that, of course, require finer elaboration. We need a values-based global governance system. Ethics truth, solidarity, responsibility with future generations. It is also critical that we design, assess, and renew our institutional, normative, and legal architecture to reflect this interconnectedness of current crisis and of the solutions that are needed. We need a renovated global governance system for the Anthropocene. That is the collective task that we have ahead of us. We need also, in order to rebuilding the trust and legitimacy in our institutions, we need to honor words and commitments and to close the huge implementation gap. Do as you say and say what you really are able to do. And that includes the responsibility of civil society, of course. So I think that the only way is by ensuring social ownership, by ensuring a meaningful, sustained participation of all actors in society. This, in spite of what I just said, should go beyond words to materialize in predictable built-in mechanisms. This is critical. And I would say, why is it so critical? Because if we want to save time, as simple as that, resources, political energy to advocate each and every time for spaces and places at the table for civil society and other key stakeholders, we rather concentrate in the substantive agenda. That's why it's so important. Just, it makes sense. And I think the other key issue is a true intergenerational and intercultural co-creation of new societal designs for this new social contract that we have mentioned so many times. And this requires that we are equipped with a different mindset. We cannot continue to operate under a linear, simplistic, fragmentary logic, but rather with a systems thinking based on complexity. Our world is increasingly complex, and responses should also reflect this complexity. We need to use a holistic lens. We need to enrich our epistemologies, have a true intercultural, cross-disciplinary dialogue. And I think that to seriously embark on the retooling of our multilateral system, we need what I would say a new glossary, a redefinition of some keywords that we often take for granted. For example, the definition of the state. The dictionary says that it is a nation or territory considered as an organized political community under one government. And that means that citizens are part of the state and therefore should have a voice when decisions that affect their rights and their survival are taken. Or let's take the other example, sovereignty, often used to counter multilateralism, is understood as the power of a government authority to take decisions for the benefit or good of a nation and of its citizens. In today's world, cooperation, concerted action to curb the climate emergency or the pandemics is by all means an issue of self-interest for a nation. And I'm convinced about the transformative power of words. As a poet, I can tell you that words do matter. So we need to do more to resignify resignifying exercise that we can do collectively. And finally, the United Nations should be considered humanity's common heritage, and as such should deserve to be rejuvenated, upgraded, so it can provide the services, the solutions it was created for. In just a final word, as in 1945, at the end of World War II, humanity is at a crossroads. We have the opportunity to build back better our multilateral system. There is no plan B for the UN, so we must collectively improve it. In the wise words of the Norwegian diplomat, Trygve Halvan Lie, the first Secretary General of the UN, whose personal assistant was no less than Sir Brian Orkord. And he says, let me quote, "Our organization reflects the imperfections of our time, but it is also an expression of the most constructive forces of our world and a symbol of hope for the future," end of quote. And as a stubborn optimist, as late Kofi Annan used to say, I know that we can look at the future with hope and not despair, with responsibility and not with indifference. And we are gathered here today because we believe in multilateralism and we are not indifferent. So thank you very much. And back to you, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Maria, as ever, for those thought-provoking remarks. I'm definitely going to remember the phrase nature's way of complaining. I might steal that from you. And thank you also for sharing with us a sense of what it's like in the room when you have the frustrations of negotiations, but also the achievements. And I totally agree with you. These processes are imperfect, but essential. We need the messiness of consultation and negotiation if we are to have the buy-in we need to move forward with implementation. And thanks also for bringing up the Secretary General's report. I agree, it's a huge opportunity. UNA UK will be working very hard with partners to hopefully, ensure that these two summits, the Summit of the Future and the Social Summit, really, lead to building that future that we all have in mind. I have a lot of questions I want to ask you, but I'm not allowed. That's going to be up to the audience. I can see we have already a few questions in the Q&A function. Please add some more. So normally, in normal times, we'd be having a physical event and I would be giving you a nice little glass award that you could take home with you. But we thought, given we're in a virtual reality still, and given our climate focus, we thought it would be special this year to be a bit more creative. And we've used the money that we would have put towards making this award to make a donation instead to the Eden Project to support reforestation. That was actually inspired by a youth activist from Fridays for Future Uganda who said, if you interview me, you need to plant a tree. So we thought we better do that. And we also want to support through a modest donation, a project of your choice in Ecuador and also in Sudan, where our next speaker is from. We are a charity. We are in need of donations ourselves. So, these amounts are very small, but we hope that through promoting these causes, raising awareness, we can encourage our members, our partners to also support this work. So we'll be sending a follow-up email featuring these projects on our website and so on. And now, in keeping with the intergenerational theme of the event, I'm going to hand over to my brilliant colleague, Rihanna, to introduce our Youth Award winner. But first, we're going to have another very short film.
The COVID-19 crisis is one of many
que se pueden
problems.
aplicar en diferentes escenarios de transmisión.
Hello, I'm Rihanna Nai, Communications Coordinator at UNA UK, and I am delighted to introduce our next speaker, the first ever youth recipient of the Sir Brian Urquhart Award, Nisreen Elsheim. Nisreen is a leading climate activist and a negotiator at intergovernmental climate change platforms. She's currently chair of the UN Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, which advises the Secretary General on the implementation of his 2020 to 2021 climate change strategy. We were delighted to be joined by Nisreen on the 75th anniversary of the UN, where she highlighted how young people are always on the front lines, on peace, on security and climate change. This is something reflected in her own actions as a champion for peace, social democracy, justice, and human rights. She's written several policy papers on climate change, renewable energy, gender, and youth. She's also currently chair of the Sudan Youth Organization on Climate Change and has mentored a number of young people. She's applied her degrees in physics and renewable energy to a career focusing on youth engagement and policy work in sustainable development. And she was an organizer of the 2019 Youth Climate Summit. Discussing what climate change means to her as a young woman from Sudan, Nisreen recently said, "It means that we don't have to worry about the certainty of our future. Climate justice means that we don't have to lose our livelihoods and income due to the climate crises." Recently, I had the pleasure of interviewing Nisreen for our upcoming climate-focused magazine on her hopes for an inclusive climate conference and the importance of individual and collective climate action. So look forward to reading her invaluable perspective when it launches next week. As Natalie mentioned, we will be having a Q&A with both Nisreen and Maria later on, so be sure to submit your questions to the Q&A section. Now, I just want to say welcome, Nisreen. Thank you so much for being here. Our members and partners would be inspired to hear about your work as a climate activist, particularly as a young woman who has seen the direct impacts of the climate crisis. And in this key moment for the climate, we'd be delighted to hear about what you've learned about effective campaigning and what your objectives are for COP26 and beyond.
Thank you very much. I am very much equally honored and glad to be here with you today. I am even more proud to share the stage and the panel, virtual panel, with a great woman that I actually personally and a lot of people around me are taking as a role model. As a young climate advocate, we understand how much suffered the first generation of the climate activists. They suffered from climate denial, they suffered from no one is listening, they suffered from not being visible at all. And yet they continued their work. It's not easy at all to continue working and pushing the climate agenda for 20 years, for 10 years, for 30 years, where no one is listening, no one is supporting, and yet no one is making actions. I salute all of the climate advocates since the climate change issue declared for all of us. They had the hardest time. I guess as a young generation, our job is absolutely not easy because we are pushing for actions, but I can only imagine how hard their mission was to actually convince people that there is climate change. It's not easy at all, and they really deserve an awarding for that. Yet, I also stress that it's very important to have this intergenerational relationship, not only because of the experience that the previous generations have, but also to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Actually, we don't have time for mistakes anymore. It's, as the event day says, it's code red for humanity. And for me, I say it's code red for any living being in Earth planet, not only humans. Biodiversity, waters, plants, anything we have in this planet is now living the code red situation. I am also very honored to receive this award by UK association, the UN UK association, but even more glad to be the first young person to be awarded this award. And this is a great acknowledgement of the young people's role in pushing and advancing the climate change, but also it's a great indication that UN is actually moving to the UN we want and to the UN we need as young people. I was so delighted by the many changes that the UN had in the last year only. First of all, last 8th of October, the Human Rights Council announced that clean, healthy environment is an essential human right, and a violation of this clean and healthy environment and climate change is a violation for human rights. Now we can gladly bring the discussion of human rights to the table of the negotiations itself. Looking forward to have a similar resolution from the Security Council, because for many people, especially people from Sudan, climate change issue is a matter of peace and security. It impacts our communities, it impacts our peaceful existence, and it impacts our livelihood very much, severely, dangerously. I was also very glad to hear from the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, his commitment to have a UN youth, and also his commitment to appoint the next generation, future generation envoy. I think we are witnessing a glory day where things that we dreamed of, we pushed for, we advocated for are actually coming true. And more needs to be done. We are not there yet, but we are in the right way, definitely. I'm very glad that I heard Mrs. Maria saying that this document is not perfect. Well, perfection is not what we are looking for. We are looking for sufficient. If the document, if the declaration, if the action is sufficient, it doesn't have to be perfect at all. We are humans. We cannot be perfect, but we can aim for an enormous joint perfectionist. If I did sufficient work, my colleague did sufficient work, UN did sufficient work, then all of us will represent the perfections that we all look for. It's not an individual effort, it's not a group of people effort, it's all of us effort. It's our mandate, it's our moral obligation. And I echo moral obligation to save this planet and to secure future for us and for the previous and next generations too. Well, I don't have much to say and much to add. I am very glad about the donation for tree planting, and it's actually a step in the right way. It's our small actions that actually build towards bigger momentum. It's our small beliefs that actually make bigger population, a bigger number of people believe. Look what young people did in the last 3 years. How many climate deniers became a climate advocate only in these 3 years? I think and I suspect that this COP will be different, not only in numbers of people, not only because of COVID, of course, and the restrictions, not only because of the testing every day, but because the spirit of the people changed. Their determination changed, and now they have a very clear plan. They have a very clear goal, and they have a very clear tools to actually reach that goal. That's why this COP will be different. And that's why climate advocacy, climate activism, and climate negotiation will be so different from now and to the future. Well, it's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I just repeat that. But we hold hope. Not hope as a fake word to just keep running and following nothing, but hope because we don't have other solution but continue working towards this climate safe planet. It's time, it's our time, it's time for action. And philosophically also, time is a very elastic word. But let's say it's the time to action because we don't again have any other solution or any other option actually. I am very glad to be here with you today. I am looking forward for more questions from the audience. I think we sometimes speak enough and now we are also doing actions, yet not enough. Thank you very much. I'm dearly and happily and pleasured to receive the award and be with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nazreen, for that. That was really inspiring, especially how you're talking about the importance of an intergenerational relationship, which is so important to be looking ahead and learning from everyone who has come before. And with that, I know that you both you, Nazreen, and Maria, welcome again, have prepared questions for each other. Nazreen, do you want to start with your question for Maria?
Yes. My question will be, Maria, what is your advice for young female climate activists on things not to do?
Let me unmute myself. Okay. Well, basically, it's the answer is very short, dear Nisrin, is never give up, never give up. And I know that sometimes it feels like the world is in chaos, that what we are doing is insufficient, that our little, contribution is not going to make these things change. And actually, we can all contribute. It is a shared responsibility. And even in our private and family life, we can take decisions as consumers, as voters, as young citizens. And a person that has the role that you have now and before, you are a reference point, a person to look up to for your generation and for mine. Since I've met you, I have learned so much from you, from your strength, from your energy, from your conviction, from your firsthand experience on what climate change can do to communities, what climate change can do to families, especially to women and girls. Again, just never give up. Never give up. That would be perhaps my little piece of advice.
Thank you, Maria, for that really important message. And now, can I ask, what is your question for Nisrin?
Yes, of course. I would ask Nisrin, what is her role? I think she has an incredible responsibility to be chairing this group of change makers and forward thinkers of young leaders in the climate arena. So, perhaps you can explain better what your role is and how important is the work that you and your team are doing right now.
Okay, with pleasure. So in 2019, we had the first ever Youth Climate Summit in New York on the sideline of the General Assembly. In that summit, the young people requested from the Secretary General to come closer from him and have this young flavor touch on the climate profile of the Secretary General and his plans and strategies. So the Secretary General decided to have a youth advisory group, and we are 7 representing all of the regions of the world. We have Paloma from Brazil. She's a very amazing lawyer and advocate for the Amazon and the indigenous communities. She represents Latin America. We have Sophia, who's trying to translate climate action documents into different languages other than the 6 UN languages for people who speak different languages to have more inclusivity when it comes to climate science and climate knowledge. She's only 19. She's from US representing North America. We have Nathan, who is a very dedicated person to policies and regulations of climate change, and he's from France and he represents Western Europe. We have our economist, the perfect person you should go to for green jobs and green recovery, Vlad from Moldova representing Western Europe. We have the researcher of the group, which is Arshana. She's a very hard worker, young female from India. She's also from an indigenous community, Caribou tribe in India, representing Asia. We have Ernest from Fiji. He represents the small island states in the Pacific. And all of us, the 7 of us, represents the FAP 7, the Public 7, advising the Secretary General. Our role exactly is to play this bridge between Secretary General and young people, and the opposite also between young people and the Secretary General, to try to reduce the bureaucracy and the gaps we have in our different systems and have a very clear voice of young people directly to the Secretary General's office and the Secretary General's climate action team. We also advise the Secretary General on his climate strategy, and we are very proud to say that the Secretary General is taking our advisory group very seriously, and we made many changes on his climate strategy according to our advice. We also represent the youth eye on the UN and how UN system is doing regarding climate change, and also different events that have been held around the world on actions, what do we need to do more and how to do it. Basically, we are the 7 younger versions of the Secretary General right now, and accumulatively, all of us represents the young people from around the world. So don't hesitate to communicate us, any 7 of us, if you have any message to Secretary General, or you think that things need to change, and tell us please how things can change, because it's easy to criticize something, but it's very hard to find solutions or replacements for the issues that you criticize. Thank you very much.
Oh, amazing. I mean, just imagine the amount of work and the great responsibility you have, but we have, you know, full confidence in your power and your understanding of things, and I'm sure that I feel well represented, and I'm sure, you know, the younger generations are going to feel very, very proud and well represented by the powerful 7 advisors on climate for the Secretary General.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Maria. As a young person, I am delighted to be represented by you, Nazreen, and the rest of the advisory group. I'm now going to open it up to questions from our Q&A, starting with a question from Alan Ware, who is asking about climate finance and kind of shifting from the way we spend. So they ask, the world spends $100 billion a year on nuclear weapons, 2 trillion per year on the military, but comparatively much less, 6 billion on the UN. And so this is not nearly enough to shift to a green economy. How can we change this? So both, perhaps Maria, if you could start with this, and then Nazreen will come to you.
Yeah. Okay. So I go first. I think that this question from Alan Ware, and greetings to him, of course, he's an incredible, you know, activist, a change maker in the interconnection between disarmament and climate. But what I would say is that it is an issue of vision and of priorities. We know, because billions and trillions spent in weapons, we know that the money is out there. The problem is what is that you prioritize, death and destruction, or life and regeneration. And I think that climate solutions and climate finance are on the side of life and regeneration. So I don't think that it's a hard choice to make if you have common sense, of course. But we know and we see that how insufficient climate finance is, especially for the developing world, especially for the most vulnerable communities. One of the achievements I remember of in Mexico, in Cancun, was the establishment of the Green Climate Fund. And there was this commitment of $100 billion by 2020. $100 billion at the end of the day is not that much. We are spending trillions in COVID recovery. And as I mentioned before, recent studies of UNEP say that only 18% of the trillions that are used to recover the economy, or only 18%, is really going to the green economy and to a proper energy transition. So I really, you know, bring this, we need to be responsible, not only to future generations, but to the current generation. We are seeing the devastating effects of climate, the human face of climate victims, massive displacement of people, millions of climate refugees around the world. Who wins? I think everybody loses. So again, it is a matter of walking the talk of really making sure that we scale up climate finance and that we equally invest in mitigation, but also in adaptation and resilience building. Very little of the existing money, which is already, far below what is needed and expected, a very tiny amount is used for adaptation and resilience building. Most of the investment is on mitigation. So we need to, to balance financing efforts. And I'm sure that Nesrin has much more to say.
Not more, actually, it's left, but it's very hard to speak about climate finance because even us as a civil society, we are even suffering more than the governments to actually access climate finance. But I think accessibility is a different issue. Now, regarding the 100 billion, which is, I always say that there is a triangle, I call it the evil triangle, which is interest, influence, and profit. And why they are the evil triangle is simply because these three things are actually holding us back from unlocking the accessibility for climate finance and unlocking climate finance itself. Unfortunately, the interest of people right now is in the wrong direction, and the influence of these people who are interested in the wrong direction is by far stronger for some reason than our influence as a climate activist. And this influence and interest are driven by profit and money gaining more. I always ask the question, do we prefer to live long and simple, healthy life, or we prefer to actually die in a wealthy way? I'm not sure what are your beliefs, but I don't believe that we will take any of our wealth with us to the afterlife, if you believe in it. So I always prefer to live simple but long and healthy life, and this is actually the choice that most of us should choose, and this is what we are advocating for right now.
Absolutely. I have another question for you, Nesrin. There seems to be an increase in climate despair, especially as you've been discussing this triangle that we're all dealing with, and it's really hard to be heard. More and more people are losing hope with climate action. Those in power are not doing enough. And so there is this attitude of, what is the point? What can be done to combat this feeling so that practical action is taken as opposed to no action?
Yes, so I will link my answer to this question to another issue. In Sudan, we lived under a dictatorship government for 30 years. And just when people decided to give up on changing the government, the magic had happened and we had the biggest revolution Sudan had, and we changed the 30 years of dictatorship only in 6 months. Now we are trying to build a new country under a democratic atmosphere. Actually, today, my people were in the street asking for democracy and so on. And everyone had this point where they said, oh, we cannot do it. They stayed 30 years, they corrupted everything is not working, we cannot do it. But then I keep asking them a question. Do we have other options? Do we have other way of going out of this? They say no. So I said, then we cannot complain until we actually make things work or die. I mean, this is very simple. We don't have an option. We have to do it. We have to push until the last breath we actually have. And because we always sometimes blame actually the previous generations because they did this. Well, I hate to bring this to young people, but soon enough, we will be the previous generations for the new coming generations. And I cannot look at any of the young people coming in the future and say, well, I gave up, because this is not an option.
That's really such an important reminder for us all. I think we could all stand to do more. And thank you for reminding us all of that. I have a question now from Arif Elam. Maria, I want to start with you, because you have this experience, both have this experience, of course, but of both the highs and the lows of climate negotiating. So what are your expectations for COP26?
Well, I think I want to defer to Nisreen because I really need to hear like a positive note from you, please. Please, Nisreen, you go first and I'll take it from.
Sure. I think one of the very good ups that we had in the climate negotiation is when I realized that we have more than 3 texts speaking about young people inclusion in climate action within the formal text. And this is a very good progress because now the role of young people have been acknowledged in a formal way, in a very technical way, in a negotiation text. And this is a great breakthrough because normally we only take care of the very technical instrument like finance, adaptation, mitigation, and we sometimes neglect this human factor of climate action and climate activism. And mentioning these different groups, indigenous communities, young people, and other human factors in the text is a great breakthrough because at the end, it's all about humanity and it's all about having a future and it's all about saving the planet. It's not only about having the perfect text at the end. The downs in the negotiation, I guess, is where we go to Rule 16. And Rule 16, for people who doesn't know it, is when the parties doesn't have consensus of one of the topics. So they move the discussion to the COP presidency and then move it to the high-level discussions. And even if we did not reach an agreement on it, then we move it to another COP or another session. And it's down because, again, I repeat, it's urgent time. It's the key thing about climate action is urgency. If we keep pushing things for next year, we don't know what will happen. No one guessed in Madrid in 2019 that the pandemic will happen and we will not have COP at 2020. And as a result of this, now this COP have the biggest agenda item with 136 agenda items to discuss. It's not logical, of course, we cannot discuss all of this in 2 weeks. So some of the items will be pushed normally by parties to or by countries to another COP or another sessions. But we stuck everything together. So I hope this COP gets end clean and tight. And by clean, I mean that we agree on text that we have held it for a long time.
Well, I think that basically what Nisreen said, that's a very clear asks on what to expect. I would say, first of all, I think that the world needs hope. I think it is heartbreaking. I read an article in The Ecologist recently speaking about climate anxiety in young people. And I think it's really not fair. It is really not fair. So it's like when you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, you have to exercise and you have to do this because your health is going to be you're going to be, your life is, under threat and we still do not exercise or do not, lose weight, etc. Why? I mean, I think that humans have to change the way we act and the way we behave with each other. I said that just before. And what that has to do with the COP26 and what to expect. It's because basically the last reports from IPCC and the recent report of the science panel for the Amazon, it's revealing that we are really reaching, a point of no return in climate change. In spite of the Paris Agreement, in spite of the commitments, in spite of the good news that we have heard, from the big emitters, China, the US, they have really committed to make incredible efforts on their mitigation, to meet their mitigation targets. So what we expect, we expect that commitments will be met with action, with investment and finance, with real, tangible and measurable plans to decarbonize the economies. I'm really worried about the global south, the developing economies, because of COVID, the financial and the fiscal stress of our countries is huge. And why, I mean, I think it's unfair, but needed at the same time to ask middle-income countries heavily dependent on, for example, oil or gas, to stop, because they also need, to address the main needs of their people. So we are in a world of paradox, but still, I think we need to see the needed climate finance, the needed increase in scalable action. We need to see the Paris rule book finished. That the operation, the implementation of the Paris Agreement depends very much on this rule book that we haven't been able to finalize for 5 years already, because there is no agreement on carbon and market mechanisms, and because we are not, we haven't decided how we can measure with the same criteria the nationally determined contributions of countries. Where do we start, and what are the criteria? So please, a friendly call to our leaders, to negotiators, that we need to get our act together. We need to come out of COP26 with hope, with a sense of direction, with concrete commitments, with the finance, the technology transfer, the capacity building for developing countries, and with clear roadmaps for mitigation, especially with the big emitters.
Thank you, Maria. And I think that really nicely leads on to this question from Dan Perrell, who asks, seeing as this moment seems to require a greater scope of governance than that of a member state, the situation is the UN is built on state sovereignty. So what practical steps should be taken to overcome these largely political barriers to global governance, and how it relates to issues that are so important, like the climate crisis?
This is for the two of us?
Yes. Whoever would like to take it first, please.
Yeah, as Marie is more experienced in this field, I would love to hear from her first, and then I will reflect.
Okay. Well, basically, I mentioned when at the beginning that we need a values-based governance system. So it's not, we don't need only like a Band-Aid approach. Let's, fix this little piece, and make this process better, and be better prepared for situations of crisis in terms of the working methods of the UN, for example, for when something like the COVID pandemic happens again, etc. But I think that we really need to discuss what are the principles and the basics for a democratic, inclusive, and efficient global governance system. And it is not an easy fix, what we need, of course. So there are critical issues that need to be addressed and resolved. How we take decisions, how is consensus built, how is the voice of society included and important to the decision-making process, but not in a case by case, but what are the structures that are built-in, predictable structures to ensure that the voices of we the peoples are part of the equation, and how to democratize the system. So these are critical questions. When we say consensus, what do we mean by consensus? Is it the maximum, agreement? It is the right to dissent, because some countries may feel like that they are in disagreement, but of course they can just say, I would not support, but it doesn't mean that a consensus cannot be reached with the majority. So these are the critical discussions. What are the institutions that we need what is the how to tackle the issue of the not only the efficiency but the implementation gap. I'm always thinking, when I was the president of the General Assembly, we basically passed and approved more than close to 400 resolutions at the General Assembly. Who is watching, to see how useful these resolutions were, if they're implemented, if they're changing the lives and improving the lives of people on the ground? So the issue of accountability, of transparency, of oversight is critical in this new social contract for a global governance that would take care of the current challenges that we face. So the answer is not an easy one, it's not a straightforward, but it is a process, and it's a process that needs to include diverse voices and the key stakeholders. You mentioned about the issue of the sovereignty of states, and I mentioned that before. I think we need to, what is a state? It's an organized society under the rule of a political system, but a state, by all means, also includes the citizens, the voters. And of course, here's when we need this redefinition. Sovereignty is, the power to take a decision for the benefit of the majorities, the benefit of the citizens, the benefit of a nation. And it's impossible to take a decision for, thinking about the benefit of the nation if we do not act in concert with other nations to face a problem like the climate crisis, like the inequalities crisis, like the pandemic for that matter. So sovereignty is a shared sovereignty, a shared responsibility as well.
Nisreen, do you have anything to add?
No, I cannot add to this. Total perfection, I cannot add.
Fantastic, thank you. We're quite close, pressed for time now. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question to you both. Perhaps, Nisreen, we can start with you. What avenues are there for civil society organizations to get involved and influence climate action at the UN? You've previously mentioned that people can come and contact you and your fellow members of the Youth Advisory Group, but how else can the UN become a more inclusive and networked organization for civil society?
Yes, well, first of all, I have to highlight that UN is a member-driven organization and like member states, but there is a lot of venues within the UN where civil society organizations can actually influence. First of all of the civil society organizations can apply to become part of the ECOSOC civil society curve. And of course, within the climate change, there is the YOUNGO, which is the youth constituency under the UNFCCC. And you can be member at YOUNGO as organization, but also as an individual. There is also different quorums and different groups. There's the indigenous groups, there is the Friends of the Environment group, there is different groups that you can be part of. And there's many venues for that. You can also apply to become part of the UNEA, United Nations Environmental Assembly, as an observer or as the civil society part. But you need to follow the process. It's a bit long, it's a bit complicated, yet it deserves it at the end. Please keep looking about venues to include yourself, your fellow mates, and also your organizations within it, because networking is a key thing in success of our work.
Thank you, Nisreen. Maria, do you have anything to add on the same question? How can we make the UN more inclusive?
I think Nisreen provided a very clear map, and what I would say is that it is urgent that we have building mechanisms that are predictable for civil society participation. In spite of the NGO committee at the UN, in spite of the ECOSOC mechanism, to give NGOs, observer status, etc., I think that the structures need to be put in place. So civil society exactly know how far they can go, where are the spaces, where is the seat for we the peoples at the table, and not to start a negotiation, in a case by case. I think it's extremely important. And perhaps it's the only way to ensure that decisions that are taken at the UN by member states, because it's an intergovernmental body, have social ownership, and that implementation can happen really at the ground level, at the national level, at the local level. Social ownership and co-responsibility and sharing the burden is extremely, extremely important. It's very important because it really defines how successful, how impactful, how reliable are, decision-making processes at the UN.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for talking to us. It's been such an honor to speak to you both, and I'm sure everyone who's been listening has learned so much from you both. Thank you once again.
Pleasure is mine, is ours actually, if I may speak on behalf of Maria too.
Thank you, Nisreen, and thank you, Rihanna. And it's been a very also emotional moment. And thank you for the award, and thank you for bringing us together, Nisreen and myself. So it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, from all of us at UNA UK, Nisreen and Maria, that was a fantastic conversation. Rihanna, you did a brilliant job as well. And thanks so much to my whole team, especially Brian, you've worked so hard to put this event together. We have another climate event tomorrow. We're going to have quite a few in the coming days. I've just popped the link to register in the chat. We'll be hosting Selwyn Hart, the UN Special Advisor on Climate Action, who's really been at the center of advocacy ahead of Glasgow. So please join us for that. If you're not yet a member of UNA UK, I have to ask you to sign up. It's free to do so now, and you can really become part of the movement that we're building for global citizens, campaigning for an effective and inclusive UN. One campaign I will just quickly flag is we are really trying to encourage the UN to appoint a high-level champion for civil society to really look at so many of the issues that both Maria and Nisreen have mentioned. We feel that's really a vital move. So thank you again, and I'm going to leave you with another very short film. It's a bit of music, actually. It's an extract from Vivaldi's Four Seasons, which has been adapted by a German orchestra in partnership with climate data scientists. Wow. To show how the seasons have changed as a result of the climate crisis. It's a very powerful and unique way that I think maybe speaks to different audiences. We'll post the link in our follow-up message to you all, so you can screen this film, in your communities as well. And of course, we'll make sure we give you some information about projects that you can, support to help, both Maria's work and Nisreen's work as well. So once again, thanks so much to our wonderful speakers and to you all for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.
you.